Matt Painter's best recruiting class ever is headed to West Lafayette with massive expectations. And with four guys to choose from, which will be Purdue's next breakout star.
You are Locked On Boilermakers, your daily podcast on the Purdue Boilermakers, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello and welcome into another episode of Locked On Boilermakers here on the Locked On Podcast Network. Now, the number one sports podcast network where it's your team every day. I am your host. I am Nick Arvin. I'm talking Boilermakers every day here on the Locked On Podcast Network, the only daily Purdue show out there. And we've got an exciting episode headed your way today because we're talking all about the 2026 Purdue recruiting class. It's the best in Matt Painter's history. It's ranked number one according to 24/7 Sports. And there's so many different guys in this class that could have that title of Purdue's next breakout star. That's what we're going to get into today, who I believe will be Purdue's next star out of the four options in 2026. And then we're going to get into the rumor mill a little bit because there's been some speculation that Purdue has been meeting with Brandon Garrison. Is there fact? Is there fiction to that? Well, we're going to break that down in the second segment. And then we're going to end out today's episode with a little bit of football chatter, specifically that offensive line that should be much improved going into the second year of the Barry Odom era. Bunch of transfers. That's what we're going to end out today's episode with. But first, today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. And right now, new customers can bet just $5 and get $250 in bonus bets if your first bet wins. So head on over to FanDuel.com to get started. But I want to jump right into things today because we have four different guys that we need to talk about in order to find the title of who's going to be Purdue's next breakout star. But before we do, let's take a little bit of a look at this class just as an overview, because as I said, it's Matt Painter's best class since he's been in West Lafayette during his coaching tenure. I don't think there's any denying that, to be perfectly honest with you. It's the most complete class. You have the second best prospect in modern Purdue history behind Caleb Swanigan and Luke Ertel. You've got Jacob Weber, who can shoot the ball lights out. You've got Sinan Huan, who I think is one of the most intriguing prospects in all of college basketball coming up next year. And of course, you've got Rivers Knight, who might be a little bit overlooked himself. Most complete class, best class in Matt Painter's history, best class maybe in Purdue basketball history, and 24/7 Sports backs that up as they have Purdue as their number one overall class in the nation, number 7 composite. But in my opinion, I feel like we have to talk about Sinan Huan first, because I get the comments, I see the comments, I see all of your comments saying you're ignoring Sinan Huan when we have these center conversations, and I'm not. I just wanted to get to this episode because I really want to go in depth about Sinan Huan because, like I said, he's one of the most intriguing prospects for me in the entire nation this year. And the reason I say that is because we saw him play in the U19 World Cup for Team China. That was the same tournament, FIBA, where Omar Meyer played for Israel and kind of had his breakout performance, scoring 30-plus points. But what a lot of people don't notice is that Sinan Huan had a breakout performance of himself in that cup, because I don't know if it was 4 or 5, somewhere in the middle, but Sinan Huan was the best defensive player in that entire FIBA World Cup. And Daniel Jacobson was there. As I mentioned, Omar Meyer was there, but Sinan Huan was averaging over 4 blocks a game in the FIBA World Cup, which is absolutely insane for a kid that's going to be a freshman coming up this year. A year before that was averaging that many blocks. Crazy. Plays at Georgetown Prep, is a 7-footer. The defensive side, there's no question about it. He is going to be a stud one day for Purdue on the defensive side. He's already shown that. He's already leaps above where other freshmen in the nation are in terms of being that rim protector. So there's no denying that. I think that Sinan Huan is going to be a special player. Here's the thing that concerns me a little bit, and I don't necessarily know if it's concern. I feel like it's more realism for what Purdue is going to need going into 2026. A lot of the conversations surrounding Sinan Huan, or a lot of the comments that I see from you guys, kind of put him in that conversation to definitely crack the rotation, but maybe even be in the conversation to start. I do see less of the starting conversation, more that Sinan Huan will be a big productive piece of Purdue's front court going into next year. And while I definitely do believe that, it's a lot tougher to develop 7-footers in year one than it is to develop these guards and these wings. That's just the nature of college basketball. That's the nature of development. These 7-footers take a little bit to get adjusted to the actual speed of college basketball. And we saw that this past year with Daniel Jacobson, who in his own right has that rim protection skill, maybe not to the level of Sinan Huan, but as a 7-footer, that's his upside. That's where his upside is. And I see a lot of similarities there with Sinan Huan, but I believe much like a Daniel Jacobson, it's going to take him a little bit to get adjusted to the speed of college basketball and to the pace, the physicality of centers that have been playing for 4 or 5 years in high level college basketball. So I don't necessarily know if he'll redshirt. I think that's more dependent on who we have at center. And right now, it's a little bit scarce if we're not able to get anybody in. I do think that Sinan Huan will crack the rotation, play some good minutes, but I don't know how ready he's going to be. And look at Zach Edey. I mean, in his first year, he was good for a freshman, but he wasn't Zach Edey. So you can start to see that it takes a little bit to get adjusted for these 7-footers. Think Sinan Huan will be special. Don't know if that's going to happen in year one. But a guy that I think could crack that rotation, could be pretty special in year one, is Jacob Weber. And you start to see the similarities between the senior class that just came out and then this recruiting class coming up for Purdue, because Jacob Weber is that sharpshooter, not necessarily as developed yet as what a Fletcher Lawyer was, but I'm telling you right now, he is one of, if not the best shooters in this recruiting class. He can get it from wherever he wants, really has limitless range. He's still starting to develop his ability to get inside, and I feel like as he grows into his frame a little bit more, the defensive side will be there. I don't think that Jacob Weber is going to be a guy in year one, as much as I think he might be able to come off the bench and give you solid production from three. I don't think he's going to be a guy that's going to start by any means because you have so many guards, or going to be a guy that is on any all freshman teams out there. He might. Maybe I'm doubting him, but I think that I think he has a lot of ways to go in terms of becoming that skill player that we know he's capable of being. But as of right now, what he provides for you day one is a sharpshooter off the bench. If Purdue doesn't elect to redshirt him, I think that's what Jacob Weber is. I don't necessarily think he's going to be that breakout star like we're trying to figure out, but I do think he's going to be an incredibly productive piece off the bench if he doesn't get that redshirt next year. So those are the first two guys. The third guy we have to talk about is Rivers Knight. Lovely Moore teammate with Jacob Weber, of course, keeping that pipeline going. Rivers Knight is the lowest recruited, I believe 3 stars according to some outlets. I think he may even crept up to a 4 according to some different outlets, but he got hurt between his sophomore year and junior year. Bad injury. So whenever these recruiting outlets really start to assign star ratings, rankings, whatever that may be, he wasn't playing to be able to get a high ranking. And I do think that's made Rivers Knight a little bit overlooked. If we're going to assign a red shirt to any of these guys, I do think it's 100% going to be Rivers Knight, to give him a little bit more time to continue to develop under Matt Painter and get ready for college basketball. I do think that's probably the scenario that Rivers Knight does redshirt, but I do think in 2 or 3 years, he could be a special player because he's overlooked right now. Physical forward, can get to the rim, can dunk with the best of them. I really like Rivers Knight, but the last guy in this recruiting class is the one that I am going to assign the role of breakout star, and I'm going to assign the role of being the future of Purdue basketball. I've been as high on this guy as anybody else you'll hear talk Purdue basketball. It's Luke Ertel out of Mount Vernon. I don't remember the exact words that Matt Painter said, but something along the lines of, this is the toughest high school player I've ever recruited. And you can see that if you watch a Mount Vernon game. He brought Mount Vernon to their first state championship this year in Indiana. Tough as can be. Used to play quarterback, so that really shows on the basketball court when you factor in the fact that he's able to pass the ball all around, has eyes in the back of his head, consistently puts up those 20-point double-doubles. He's an elite 3-point shooter. We saw him battle up against Fletcher Lawyer, tied Fletch for the best round in the State Farm 3-point contest the other day at Butler. I'm telling you right now, Luke Ertel is going to be a star for this team. I don't know how that battle's going to go with Omer Meyer and him once we get into the summer, but having those two guys push each other for the role of being starting point guard, especially Luke Ertel, the potential to be starting point guard in year one, that's special. And Luke Ertel is a special talent. I think that we see the next great Purdue point guard in Luke Ertel. I'm booking it. That's what I'm saying right now. I have never been as high on a high school athlete, his ability to translate his game from high school to college the way that I am with Luke Ertel. He was a third-team All-American, according to Max Preps, out of high school. Should have been a McDonald's All-American if that whole game wasn't rigged for certain guys, but that's a conversation for another day. Luke Ertel, he's special. He is going to be Purdue's breakout star in 2026. Book it. I'm saying it right now. But here in this next segment, we're going to take it away from recruiting and get into the transfer portal because the rumor mill is turning and Brandon Garrison out of Kentucky may have been linked to Purdue. That's what we're getting in here next. How much fact is there to Brandon Garrison to Purdue? I don't know, but we'll find out. Coming up here next on Locked On Boilermakers. But first, the NBA playoffs are here where every possession matters, every matchup is magnified, and every game can swing a series. And right now, FanDuel is giving new customers a great way to get in on the action. And here's what I love about FanDuel, because you can bet just $5 and get $250 back in bonus bets if your bet wins. And the app makes it easy to follow the action with player stats, trends, and matchups all in one place. It makes the entire playoff experience more engaging from start to finish. And although my Pacers aren't in the NBA playoffs this year, it makes it easy to bet on whoever you think in a 7-game series, moneyline spreads, whatever you want with FanDuel. You can even take that NBA champion right now here in April. So head on over to FanDuel.com to get started. That's FanDuel. Play your game. We're back here on today's Locked On Boilermakers, and it's time to get that rumor mill churning a little bit because there might be a link to Kentucky center Brandon Garrison, the transfer now to Purdue. That's what we're going to talk about here in this segment. Before we do, though, I do just want to tell you guys one more time about that Everydayer Club. Of course, right now is the best time to get in because you're already going to get that ad-free Locked On Boilermakers content. Also going to get access to the exclusive Everydayer Club Discord chat. But as of right now, you're going to get in for $5 a month. Can't beat it. Got to join it. It's so much fun. So I'm going to leave that link down below for you guys. Make sure y'all get into the Everydayer Club. But as I mentioned, some different people have thrown out that Brandon Garrison, the transfer out of Kentucky, might be linked to Purdue. And let me give you a little bit of a backstory here, some background knowledge in case you guys aren't up to date with this whole situation. So essentially, there's a mass exodus, as you guys know, from Kentucky right now. And growing up in the part of Indiana that I did, there were a lot of Purdue fans, a lot of Indiana fans, also some Kentucky fans out there. So part of my family, Kentucky fans, I did watch a lot of Kentucky basketball. I have watched a lot of Kentucky basketball along with Purdue and a lot of Big Ten basketball as well. So I'm kind of up to date with this Kentucky roster. I've watched a lot of Brandon Garrison over the past couple of years, but Sleepers Media puts out a video where they say, allegedly, take this with a grain of salt because this is coming from them. I'm not sure if there's any credible sources here, but they say that Brandon Garrison was on a Zoom call with either Matt Painter or a staffer from Purdue. You add that with the fact that Brian Newbert reported that Purdue is looking for a center in the transfer portal. It makes a little bit of that's why the rumor's there. I'll put it that way. That is why the rumor is there that Brandon Garrison could be headed to Purdue. And while I do see the take there, especially if Brandon Garrison is on a Zoom call with either Painter or a Purdue staffer, that doesn't necessarily mean much to me. You know how many different guys are on Zoom calls with different coaches at this point in the year. I wouldn't necessarily say that Brandon Garrison is coming to Purdue just because he was on a Zoom call with either Matt Painter or a Purdue coach, even if that did happen, which is not confirmed at this point. But there is the rumor out there because when you mix that with the fact that Purdue might be looking for a center, it makes sense to look at a guy like Brandon Garrison. However, with that being said, it makes almost no sense for what Purdue is going to want to do to bring in Brandon Garrison. Put the whole Oscar Clough situation aside for a second. We've still got that court case, hopefully finishing up on Friday with Brody Robinson. But let's just assume for a second, which it's starting to seem more and more like this, that Oscar Clough will not be back for next year. That leaves you in a situation where you either have a Raleigh Burgess or you have a Daniel Jacobson starting at center, assuming that you don't bring in a guy in the transfer portal. You bring in Brandon Garrison and you're going to have him as a backup behind a Daniel Jacobson or a Raleigh Burgess. I don't think so. I don't think that you pay Brandon Garrison, and the number going around right now in NIL money for these bigs, it's hovering around 4 or 5 million, which Purdue is just flat out not going to pay, especially when you consider the fact that I don't really believe Brandon Garrison is going to be a step up. I don't believe he should be a starting center, and he's not going to want to be a backup at Purdue. So this doesn't make any sense to me that Brandon Garrison would come to Purdue. Maybe there's interest on his side, but it doesn't make sense from a Purdue perspective to bring in a guy that, number one, wouldn't be that much of an upgrade at center. It would provide you a little bit of depth, but no way in heck is Brandon Garrison going to be a backup center for you. And no way is Matt Painter going to pay the amount of NIL money that it would take to bring Brandon Garrison into Purdue. So people can say what they want. Apparently there was that Zoom call, but it just doesn't make sense for me that Purdue would genuinely be going after Brandon Garrison. Now on the court, I think that he's physical. I think that he can block shots. You saw that game against Santa Clara, the first round Kentucky played in the tournament, where Otega Owe hits that crazy shot. But the reason they got there was because largely in part of Brandon Garrison, where he was able to guard the perimeter. He was able to block shots and got into foul trouble early in that game, but was able to still stick around. So I think that he could be a solid center somewhere else, but I don't see him necessarily being a starter for a Power 5 program and producing a whole lot, because that's what Kentucky saw. They elected that Malachi Moreno is now going to be the starting center in Lexington. And if that's what Mark Pope, in his genius mind, that is a joke, by the way, if that's what Mark Pope decided, that Malachi Moreno is so much better than Brandon Garrison that he is going to, I suppose, force him out into the transfer portal, then why would other teams take that same risk and say that we believe he's going to be good enough to be a starting center and be good enough to lead our team to contend? I'm not saying he's not a valuable piece for a squad. I'm not saying that he's a valuable piece of depth, but he's just not going to be worth the NIL money for what he actually is and what he can actually produce. So as I mentioned, recap is Sleepers Media reported that apparently that Brandon Garrison was on a Zoom meeting with either Matt Painter or a Purdue personnel. Pair that with the fact that Brian Newbert said that maybe Purdue is going after a starting center right now. That's why the rumor is here. I don't think that Brandon Garrison makes sense. I do believe that if Purdue is going after a center, you can still find some better guys in the portal. It's not going to be a top center. It's not going to be a Flory Badunga, who's probably going to Duke right now, but it's going to be a guy, if Purdue is able to get someone that is in that 10 to 20 range. And let's add this in for a second. Purdue, or Matt Painter specifically, has never brought in a traditional transfer. It has always been a graduate transfer. Look at Oscar Clough. Look at Caden Pierce. That is kind of what's on brand for Matt Painter. So I don't see him making a splash like that. If we're going to bring someone in, it's likely going to be an older, more experienced center that's going to be able to command the offense and allow for Daniel Jacobson, for Raleigh Burgess to continue to be able to develop off that bench. So I'm calling hogwash on the Brandon Garrison rumors. Maybe there was a Zoom call, but I'm saying right now it would make zero sense for Purdue to recruit Brandon Garrison in any way, shape, or form. Doesn't make sense. Wouldn't be good for this team. And I just don't see Matt Painter doing it. So that's flat out how I feel. Do still think that if Oscar Clough is gone, and assuming that Brian Newbert's report is correct, that Purdue is looking for a starting center, we have to speculate a little bit that there's not much optimism for Oscar Clough to come back in the Purdue locker room. But I'll keep you guys updated. Maybe Brandon Garrison is wearing the black and gold. I doubt it, but I could see Purdue possibly going after a center, or at least a big that could play the forward alongside Caden Pierce. We're going to figure it out, but that's exactly what I think Purdue needs. We don't need Brandon Garrison, but what Purdue football needs is a better offensive line going into 2026. They may have been able to find that in the portal, and that's what we're going to talk about to end out today's episode of Locked On Boilermakers. What the offensive line is going to be like in Barry Odom's second year. Will it be better? Will it be not? And what could that mean for Purdue as they try to string together some wins in 2026? That's coming up here next on Locked On Boilermakers.
I'm Clea Butler, host of Locked On Women's Basketball, and this is Mazda's Women's Basketball Snapshot, celebrating the work no highlight reel can ever capture. UCLA made history by winning its first NCAA women's basketball national championship, dominating South Carolina 79-51. The Bruins controlled the game from start to finish with elite defense and balanced scoring, finishing the season 37-1. Star center Lauren Betts was named Most Outstanding Player, leading a team effort that capped a 31-game winning streak. Under head coach Corey Close, UCLA secured a landmark title that has been decades in the making. These moments are earned off the clock, those long before the lights ever come on. The sweat, the fakes, the doubt, the scrapes. I'm coming back for more every time. Mazda puts that same drive into every detail. Wins define the moment. Putting in the work, that defines you. There's more to a Mazda because there's more to you.
Yesterday, we talked about Kevin King coming back to West Lafayette for another go-around, and this time, hoping to fix Purdue's defense, which was a bad spot last year for the Boilermakers, rebuilding that linebacker core and trying to have that relentless attack-first defense that the Boilermakers have been missing in previous years. But if you look outside of the defense, so the offensive side of the ball, last year was tough for the offensive line as well. And that's something that Barry Odom has really tried to address with all the different coaching overhauls that have happened throughout the offseason. And he brings in a new offensive line coach in Zach Crabtree. That's what we're going to talk about here to end out today's episode of Locked On Boilermakers, what Crabtree is wanting to do with this offensive line, who he's brought in with the transfer portal, and what my expectations are for the offensive line going into this next year. And when you look at the way that it was last year, you bring in guys like Hank Purvis, guys like Braden Joyner, and you thought that potentially they would be able to produce for you. Now you bring guys in from UNLV, and that's really the big concern. As good as those two guys were at UNLV for Barry Odom the year before, and they come over with him, what is the size at UNLV? What is the production at UNLV compared to production in the Big Ten? That was the biggest question for me, is could you get guys on the offensive line from a program like that would be able to translate to the Big Ten? And for a while, I thought that there was a chance, because what Barry Odom has consistently wanted to do for other programs he's coached for, whether that be in Missouri, a UNLV, or a Purdue, is to get a big offensive line that you can run behind. And that's going to be the identity going into this year. That should have been the identity going into last year, but Devin Mockabee just really didn't have the chance to run because the offensive line wasn't all that good. And that's why you bring in a guy like Zach Crabtree. He coached at Fresno State. He coached at USC, was an offensive lineman at Oklahoma State. He has a good track record for building up strong physical offensive lines that you can run behind. And then you look at what Purdue wanted to do in the transfer portal this year, and you start to see this offensive line, the identity of the offensive line, starting to form. So before we get into the transfer portal, another big piece of this puzzle is the fact that Purdue retained Joey Tanona, who was a huge piece of that offensive line. In my opinion, one of the better guys on the offensive line. So that's a big addition to keep at Purdue. That's something that I was really happy with. So you've already got one guy on the offensive line. You also return Ethan Trent, Jude McCoskey, who we'll see how much they play, but if nothing else, the ability to have that depth, because last year we cycled through quite a few different offensive line lineups. And that's just the nature of college football. You're going to run through a lot of different offensive linemen. That's just the nature of the position. It's pretty injury prone. So to have that depth is going to be pretty big for Purdue. But here's the biggest difference from last year compared to this year. And the reason why I'm optimistic about the offensive line this year is because you bring in some really quality transfers. And it's not guys from UNLV. It's guys that have started for Power 4 programs in college football, guys with experience and guys with size. That's exactly what this offensive line is going to need. And that's why Zach Crabtree brought some of these guys in. Barry Odom brought some of these guys in. So we're going to start with the three guys that actually played some games last year for power conferences. Boaz Stanley is a big one, and he comes out of South Carolina, basically swaps with Hank Purvis, who goes over to South Carolina as Boaz Stanley transfers to Purdue. I think Boaz Stanley is going to be key. I don't necessarily know. I believe he'll slot in on the interior offensive line, but he's going to start day one for Purdue and going to be a huge piece, much like he was last year for Beamer at South Carolina. Then you've got USC. They've got Micah Bonalos, also Makai Sinai, who comes in. Bonalos was the guy that started last year for USC, but Sinai is also going to want to get some playing time in the starting lineup. I do think he might be able to crack that starting lineup for Purdue's offensive line, but 100% I see a guy in Micah Bonalos playing, and then Nuku Mafi, who started last year at Oklahoma State, also comes over to Purdue. You start to see what Purdue is recruiting is physical guys that can really do a good job of getting up the field and run blocking. That's what this team is going to need. You also got Jatavius Shivers, who comes over from South Carolina. You bring in 5 guys. That's dang near a full offensive line when you take out Joey Tenona out of the equation, who I definitely see still starting. So you're still going to have Joey Tenona in that starting lineup. I could see 4 of these guys, probably a Boaz Stanley, Micah Bonalos, and Nuku Mafi, definitely starting them throw either a Jatavius Shivers or Micah Sinai based on what you see the best value is. That's your offensive line right there. And if these guys are able to get it going during spring ball, get it working during summer, and build up some chemistry, because as you guys know, the offensive line is only as good as the weakest link. I do think that we're going to be much improved going into next year. I love everything I've heard from Zach Crabtree. Seems to have a good head on his shoulders, and he knows the offensive line inside and out. So if anybody's going to be able to get a team chemistry and offensive line chemistry up the way that it needs to be, I do have some faith that Zach Crabtree is going to be able to do that. You need guys that Antonio Harris, you need guys that Jarrett Gibson are going to be able to run through, because last year, Devin Mockaby didn't have that luxury behind some of these newer UNLV guys that were there last year, no longer with the program now. So I'm high on this offensive line. I think that they'll be pretty solid. Just to recap, you bring in Jatavius Shivers, Boaz Stanley, Micah Sinai, Micah Bonalos, and Nuku Mafi, alongside Joey Tenona, also returning as Ethan Trent and Juden Bukowski. And this offensive line should be set for year 2 of the Barry Odom era. But that's all I got for you guys today. I hope you guys enjoyed another episode of Locked On Boilermakers. Make sure to join me once again tomorrow as we're recapping the news for the day. Once again, Luke Ertel is my breakout star for the Boilermakers. I think that Brandon Garrison to Purdue is straight hogwash. Not going to happen. I think the offensive line is going to be much improved going into 2026 for Barry Odom's squad. That's all I got for you guys once again. So make sure to subscribe, make sure to like and comment, because it helps me out a ton as we want to continue to grow this content, daily Purdue content here on the channel. Make sure to get in the Everydayer Club. That's huge. So much fun to be in there. I'll leave that link down below in the description. That's all I got. So as always, boiler up, hammer down.